It is 11:30. You know that's time for Detroit's only nightly political talk show. This, my friends, is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. Dozens of families grieving their loved ones after that airliner and an Army helicopter crashed midair over the Potomac River. Officials believe there are no survivors tonight. It's the worst U.S. airline disaster in nearly 25 years. There's no word at this hour on what caused the military helicopter and American Airlines flight to crash, but all 64 people on that flight, plus the 3 soldiers on the helicopter, are gone. They're dead tonight. At least 28 bodies have been pulled from the river. The NTSB held a news conference this afternoon saying it's very early in the investigation. But here's what we do know right now. The helicopter apparently flew into the path of the American Airlines flight as it was coming in for a landing at Ronald Reagan National Airport. You know, at this point, we can tell you flight conditions were clear, no weather issues. As this investigation plays out, we know air traffic control staffing was not normal. In fact, one controller was doing the work that's normally assigned to 2 people. That's according to a report by the FAA. Today, the NTSB talked about how this investigation will play out from here.
Intention is to have a preliminary report within 30 days, and the final report will be issued once we've completed all of our fact-finding and investigation. Now, we will not be determining the probable cause of the accident while we are here on scene, nor will we speculate about what may have caused this accident.
This is the deadliest air crash since 2001 when an American Airlines flight crashed just after takeoff in New York. 260 people died on that day. Again, this is very early in the investigation of this crash. You can see it right over the sky there from these different cameras. Just devastating. It's a story that's developing by the minute, so of course, stay with us for updates. President Donald Trump addressing the tragedy in the White House briefing room today. He started the news conference with a moment of silence, honoring the victims, saying it was an hour of anguish for the country. But he quickly pointed the finger at the Biden administration, claiming diversity efforts made standards slip overall, and then blamed air traffic controllers, the helicopter pilots, and Democratic policies. He said all of this, even as he acknowledged the cause of the crash, still isn't known.
This was a dark and excruciating night in our nation's capital and in our nation's history, and a tragedy of terrible proportions. As one nation, we grieve for every precious soul that has been taken from us so suddenly, and we are a country of we are in mourning. I put safety first. Obama, Biden, and the Democrats put policy first, and they put politics at a level that nobody's ever seen, because this was the lowest level. Their policy was horrible, and their politics was even worse. The FAA website shows that the agency's guidance on diversity hiring were last updated on March 23rd of 22. They wanted to make it even more so. And then I came in, and I assume maybe this is the reason. The FAA, which is overseen by Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a real winner. That guy's a real winner. Do you know how badly everything's run since he's run this Department of Transportation? He's a disaster. He was a disaster as a mayor. He ran his city into the ground, and he's a disaster now.
Again, it's important to point out that investigators say it's simply too early to know the exact cause of the crash. That's why they're in the water, on the ground, trying to figure that out. People in charge are trying to figure out exactly what happened, and they're saying we should not speculate. But of course, our hearts go out to everyone impacted by this tragedy. That's first and foremost. As this investigation plays out, there's a lot to unpack with this. Joining us now to talk about all of this, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and Troy Mayor Ethan Baker, a Republican. We thank you both for joining us here on The Pulse tonight. And I want to begin just by saying this. I don't care if it's President Biden, President Trump, or whoever's in the Oval Office. They don't get to take the microphone away from family members who are mourning at this hour. And so we're not going to begin with those divisive comments. Instead, we're going to begin with the investigation. I want to thank both of our esteemed guests for joining us here. By the way, we should mention Mayor of Troy. It's not a partisan position, but he is a Republican who often talks and works across the aisle with others. So we thank you for joining us. And of course, Congresswoman Dingell, we thank you. First of all, from a federal level, from a congressional level, give us an update on what we do know about where we're heading with this investigation right now.
I mean, first of all, I have to say, like everybody else, our prayers and our thoughts and our love is with these families whose lives were suddenly turned upside down. The fact of the matter is we don't know a lot right now, Roop, and I think it is very important that we let those that have the that know what they're doing and are supposed to be investigated this and get the facts. We know how many people were there. They're still in the process of recovering bodies, the fuselage, and I think that all of this idle speculation is helping nobody.
And right now, the NTSB has the difficult task, of course, of not only finding these bodies and returning them to families for closure, but also trying to figure out how this all happened. Ethan Baker, you spent some time in Washington. I just saw you there for the inauguration. This is a tight-knit town, of course, as Congresswoman knows and you know. And right now, that is really important to say, hey, in leadership, we need to pay attention to the investigators right now. Isn't that true?
For sure. And I want to echo the Congresswoman's comments. I mean, 67 lives expected to be lost, but the ripple effect on the families and the stories that we're going to hear about each of those individuals is awful and something that I can't even imagine, frankly. And but the investigation will be key, and it's so early, and this happens every time there's a tragedy like this. The conspiracies and the speculation starts, and you see a story on the news, on the internet, and you think, oh, that's what happened, and people run with it, and it's often wrong. So I urge everybody, at least in the city of Troy and around, to take a deep breath and follow the facts as best you can, and know that there will be information coming. I mean, the federal government consistently does provide quality reports on issues and disasters like this, but it does take a little bit of time.
It certainly does, and it's so early, and it's, you know, just a day later, here we are. But let's talk for a moment about what we do know in terms of when you have a change in leadership. And Congresswoman, you've seen this movie before. One president leaves, another one comes in. We have a change in leadership. Sean Duffy is new. Pete Hegseth new with the military. Is that a precarious time in this country for things to be run and things to be staffed?
You know, I want to say several things.
Sure.
First, transition, our times have changed, but there is a reason that you have a transition time between administrations. People do hope that something like this never happens, but prepare for it. But there are things that have been done that have led to where we are, and people need to pay attention to it. Government shutdowns, budget freezes, hiring freezes, lack of training, uncertainty, and now sending a letter giving everyone a buyout option and encourage them to retire and resign from their job when there's already a shortage. That is contributing to all of this too. And we shouldn't be undercutting or attacking the men and women that are in those control towers who are working under very difficult, hazardous situations. We should be asking, what is the situation? Do we need to be making fixes? What's going on at Reagan Airport? Is there too much traffic? Let's get the facts and let's make changes.
Well, the configuration was not normal for the
Correct.
time of day and the volume of traffic at that time. And we know that this air traffic controller at the time who was working two positions at the time of the crash instead of one. In terms of managing this kind of a crisis, they'll, Ethan, be looking very closely at that.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, the Congresswoman knows this airport better than you or I promise.
Yeah,
She's
absolutely.
been there, in and out of there so many times. It is an overly packed airport. I think there's too many flights going in and out of Reagan National. And something's got to be done about it. And you've got that tight airspace, and I mean, everyone's got to go up and down the river. It's a recipe for disaster. There's been disasters in the past, but the management of it and how it plays out is going to be key. There is going to be a time of transition, always in transitions. The goal, I think, is that you have the careers and the politicals. The careers keep the ship steady while the politicals get their feet. Frankly, I think that's how I always have viewed it from the outside. But there is some turmoil going on, and there's been a lot of projected changes, and I think that maybe plays a role, but it's not a time to blame and point fingers. I think that's the hardest thing about it. It's, let's focus on the good work that is done. There will be a time when we'll know causes, there'll be liability, there'll be all of those things, but to come out on day one and to make some of those statements is difficult.
It's honestly, and let's just call it what it is. Yeah. I don't care if you are an ardent supporter of this president or not. No one here, this is not a king, this is a president who's an elected leader, and he can make mistakes and say the wrong things, and I think it's safe to say this was simply too early to be talking about blame and where Pete Buttigieg and talking about DEI programs when in fact you still have families who are mourning this loss. That was deeply offensive to a lot of people on both ends of the political spectrum, by the way.
I mean, to be very candid, I think what he did today, blaming, was quite frankly racist and sexist. There are very good, capable, talented people, and I quite frankly think that we've got to stop the demonization of public servants. We are all flying. Well, not everybody's flying every day, but there are people that are keeping our lives safe every day, touching it in so many different ways, from public safety to law enforcement to fire to the air traffic controllers to our health. Let's not badmouth them. Let's make sure that we've got good, talented people in those jobs who come from all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of communities, that we're giving them the support that we need.
But for all we know right now, Mayor Baker, that these air traffic controllers were working, these soldiers could have been all white men. For him to come out and say it's DEI to blame for something like this, when in fact we don't even know the details of the case, is pretty inflammatory so early on.
It's inflammatory. It's President Trump. I think he maybe needs to realize he's the president again and not a candidate. There's a little bit of rhetoric differences, I think, that happen. We're looking for a commander-in-chief today, not someone who's going to go rally the troops today. But, you know, millions of people voted for Donald Trump because they love that he speaks what's on his mind and has no problem saying some of these things. Millions others didn't because they can't stand it, and it terrifies them. But from my perspective, it's not how I would have done it, obviously.
The days after 9/11, we'll all remember Rudy Giuliani being coined America's mayor. We all remember George W. Bush, not necessarily a popular president at the time. Half the country voted for him, half the country didn't. He stood on top of the rubble at 9/11 and didn't blame anybody, but talked about how we have to come together. Perhaps someone can get in President Trump's ear and tell him that's what we need more than anything.
I hope so. I don't think I'm the right person, but
he doesn't listen to you. Huh?
I don't know. He might.
He actually could. He actually could in a weird way. I mean, I mean that with respect.
But I do think right now we need to come together, period. That's what I'm going to ask everybody to do. We are the United States of America. United we stand, divided we fall. The fear and what I've seen in the last week while I've been home, this has been one of the longest, saddest, hardest weeks I've ever seen. As people are worried about Meals on Wheels and Head Start and seniors and child care and daycare, we're all in this together. We're community. Our strength is our unity.
Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, Mayor Ethan Baker of Troy, thank you both for joining us here today. A Republican, a Democrat, all talking about what we need to do to come together as a country on this pretty dark hour. Well, next on The Pulse, we're diving into the race for Detroit Mayor. City Council member Fred Durhal III is here with his message for voters and goals for the city, what he says makes him different from the other two running for this office. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Welcome back to The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Joining us now to talk about his run for Detroit mayor and his message for voters, City Council member Fred Durhal III. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
It's good to see you as well, Roop. Thank you for having us.
We had two other people sitting in this very chair in the last few weeks who also say they want this job. They told us their reasons for why they want it. Why do you want this job?
I think it's because I love the city of Detroit. We've made tremendous progress here in the city of Detroit. No one wants to go backwards, but I think it's important to, highlight that we are in one of the most important moments here in the city of Detroit. The next mayor is going to define what our city is going to look like for decades to come, and they've got to have a vision, they've got to have a plan, and they've got to have experience to be able to bring our communities together, whether that's the business community or our residents and the community as a whole.
You and Sontil Jenkins and Mary Sheffield all have one thing in common, at least, is that you all believe that you want this job for that reason. You all three have served as city council members. What makes you different?
What makes me different is right now I am the only candidate who can say that we served down at City Hall as a council member, but I served 2 terms in the Michigan State Legislature. Both of those terms were in the minority, and as we see right now how government is changing, we're going to need somebody who can continue to deliver the resources for the residents of the city of Detroit and get things done.
So when you say you have this legislative experience, you've worked and reached across the aisle when you were in the minority and tried to figure out what you could do. What would you say is your biggest accomplishment as a legislator?
Well, we have many accomplishments. Most of the time we were playing defense being in the minority, but what I can say is what was an accomplishment is continuing to deliver dollars here to the city of Detroit. So at the time when they wanted to cut statutory revenue sharing, which helps us fund police, fire, EMS, particularly back in 2015, when we were just emerging from the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history, we protected those funds. We delivered those funds down here for vital vital programs such as DAPSEP, Detroit Area Pre-College Engineering Program, Flip the Script from Goodwill Industries that helps stop the pipeline to prison. We have that experience to deliver those funds and resources here.
Let's talk about what we just saw. The last big Democratic race that happened that we all had our eyes on was this race for presidency. By anyone's standards, you could say that the Kamala Harris camp completely misapproximated their influence and their ability to convince voters to come on board with them. They lost this race. What does that teach you about the Democratic Party and where that party is headed and what you have to do differently?
Yeah, I've been a Democrat my whole life. I was the former assistant Democratic leader of the House. I think what it teaches us is that we've got to do a better job talking about the issues that matter to residents. One thing about being on the Detroit City Council, it affords you the opportunity to be on the ground here. It is a nonpartisan office, but you're deep in the community. So you get to hear what folks are talking about relative to the economy, relative to when they go to the grocery store, what's the price of eggs? Am I going to have good schools that I can put my children in? And so those are some of the things that we are hearing. But what we have to learn is messaging-wise, as we are talking about really what our plans are going to be, we've got to make sure that it's resonating amongst the folks and they're issues that they really care about.
Do you think there are, I often asked Mayor Duggan this question, and he would often push back, but about two Detroits, about one Detroit that gets all the attention, the NFL draft, the downtown, the restaurants, the bars, many of them, by the way, black-owned, thanks to Motor City Match money and all kinds of success stories. But then you have people who live in the poorest of the poor neighborhoods, and they're watching us right now saying, is this just another politician who's going to look at the big initiatives and not look at the really nitty-gritty?
No, I think what you're seeing is a public servant who's concerned about both. I will say that sometimes folks may feel like there is two Detroits, and that narrative is pushed out there. But we are one Detroit. We do need a vibrant downtown. We definitely do, so we can generate revenue so we can put back into the neighborhoods and continue to stabilize those same neighborhoods. But we've also got to do a couple things a little bit different. When we talk about development doesn't only have to be in downtown. We've got to focus on our commercial corridors here in the city of Detroit that are adjacent to the neighborhoods, that foster small businesses. You mentioned Motor City Match, which is a good program for entrepreneurs. We've got to strengthen those.
And Mayor Mike Duggan has done a lot in the neighborhoods. In fact, when I first got here in 2009, I remember that the streetlights were off, the police call times were terrible. He's turned that around. What else would you say are some of his most successful neighborhood programs that have to continue should you get the job?
So I think they've been very good at helping push our neighborhoods forward. We have started to see the demolition of a lot of the abandoned structures, over 30,000 at one period. We've seen that folks are now connected more to neighborhood services, the Department of Neighborhoods now, kind of that neighborhood city hall type of feel. Each district has it. So I think those are some successes, but I think we've got to go just a little bit deeper in our neighborhoods. There are still issues that folks talk about relative to blight and the response time of how we eliminate that blight. We have a great app, they say the Improved Detroit app, but we've got to improve the Improved Detroit app, and we should be able to have residents know where their constituent concern is in real time. And that's going to be an idea and a plan that we're going to push forward so they can see how their government's working for them.
Well, you just launched your campaign and you made an appearance on The Pulse. We thank you for doing that, and anyone who puts their hat in the ring, we invite them on the show, and we thank you for being with us. Fred Durhall III, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Come back and talk to us again sometime. We're getting you caught up to date on some of the big political headlines next, including the latest person considering a run for governor of Michigan next year. It's a name you might not have heard in a while. Any guesses? We'll have the answer in 3 minutes. It is People, Power, and Politics. Thanks for staying up late with us here on The Pulse. We have a lot of political news to catch you up on today, so let's get right to it. More of President Trump's cabinet appointees were on Capitol Hill today. One of them was Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who was in front of a different committee today, but still faced tough questions about his stances on vaccines. He's tried to distance himself from his previous comments that came off as anti-vax, but faced questions about his pushing a theory scientists have debunked, that vaccines cause autism.
Vaccines do not cause autism. Do you agree with that?
As I said, I'm not going to go into HHS with any preordained.
I asked you a simple question, Bobby. The studies all over the world say it does not. What do you think?
Senator, if you show me those studies, I will absolutely, as I promised to Chairman Cassidy, I will apologize.
That is a very troubling response because the studies are there. Your job was to have looked at those studies as an applicant for this job.
So your past of undermining confidence in vaccines with unfounded or misleading arguments concerns me. Can I trust that that is now in the past?
I'm pro-safety. I'm pro-good science. I worked for 40 years to raise awareness about mercury and other toxics in fish, and nobody called me anti-fish. All my kids are vaccinated. I believe vaccines have saved millions of lives and play a critical role in healthcare.
Others in front of Senate committees today, FBI Director nominee Kash Patel. He insisted he does not have a, quote, enemies list and that the Bureau under his leadership wouldn't go after the president's adversaries or launch politically motivated investigations. But all of that got us wondering, how closely are you following these confirmation hearings playing out on Capitol Hill? We hit the streets to get a pulse check. Here's what some of you told us.
I've been following it a little bit, just not that closely.
Any thoughts or anybody that sticks out to you one way or the other? There's no wrong answers.
I don't think anybody sticks out. They're all just kind of the same.
No, not yet, but I'm going to start paying attention to what's going on.
No, I haven't. They're all the same to me.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts or any opinions on it?
Oh, they do the right thing.
We're also asking you the question on fox2detroit.com on a scale of 1 to 10. How closely are you following the hearings? Scan the QR code on the right of your screen to vote. So far, the average answer is just about a 7. And finally, tonight, we're looking ahead to a different race in 2026, the race for governor. As we know, Governor Gretchen Whitmer is term limited, so there will be someone new in that office. And another name now considering a run on the Republican side, and it's a bit of a throwback. Mike Cox, remember him? He was Michigan's Attorney General from 2003 to 2011. Actually ran for governor in 2010, but lost in the primary to Rick Snyder. Since then, he's ran his own law firm and released a statement on X, the old Twitter, announcing he's exploring a run for governor. That statement says in part this: I'm exploring that run because the Michigan that once allowed a carpenter's son to achieve anything is slipping away. And if I decide to run, I'm ready to put my own skin in the race before asking others to join me in fighting for our state's future. If he runs, he joins State Senator Minority Leader Eric Nesbitt on the Republican ticket. And in another race, former Congressman and U.S. Ambassador Mike Rogers confirmed today he's considering a run for Senate next year. We'll have another open seat in Michigan after Senator Gary Peters announced he won't run for re-election. So buckle up. It's about to be a wild midterm. That is the Pulse for tonight. Remember to share your thoughts with me on the show or a burning political question you may have. My email is at the bottom of your screen, and you can scan the QR code to auto-launch that email. I'm Roop Raj. Have a good night, everybody.